So today it's time for the second part of my May wrap up. I read 4 books, well I finished 4 books, one of which was an audiobook that I've been listening to for a while, but I'm going to count it because I wanted to get 4 books done in the second half of the month. All of these were 4 stars or above, so it went really well, so I'm going to get straight into it. The first book I read in the second half of the month was Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick. This was my non-fiction pick for the month, and it's basically a non-fiction book about North Korea, and Barbara Demick is a journalist who goes around speaking to people who have left North Korea about what their lives were like. And through those conversations she manages to build quite a wholesome picture of what life in North Korea was like. This predominantly looks at, in the 90s there was a major famine issue in North Korea. A lot of people died, which I didn't actually know anything about, so it was really interesting reading this. It's quite harrowing at times, obviously, as you can understand, but it starts out almost a little bit comic. Things like the fact that they have to have pictures of their leaders in their house and they have to dust it every day and someone checks whether they've dusted it or not. And it's not funny because it's a real place, but it's laughably just bizarre and you just can't get your head around it. But then it goes into a much darker stage where people are literally dying on the streets. There's piles of people being carted away, dead or dying, and it gets really quite deep and dark and a little bit uncomfortable at times, but I think it's important to know about this kind of thing, and it's kind of frightening as well. I think communism is such an interesting thing to look at because in theory it should be the perfect system. It should be complete equality and nobody's starving but nobody's really rich either, and everybody just has what they need to get by, and it kind of in theory should create this absolutely harmonious community. But the problem with it is that whenever you get a communist leader they seem to have real ideas about their own importance, and obviously the idea of communism is that the leaders are the same as the people. So it's very interesting to look at the way that the leaders kind of make communism fit their own ideas, and they're all fine for everybody else to be equal, but they are higher. So in the starvation they are taking the food, and there is some aid that arrives to help the people, but they take the food for themselves. So it's just a system that really doesn't work. But what's interesting about reading this, there's one woman that Barbara Demick speaks to who, I think she was very much a normal North Korean woman. Some of the people in here are sort of big thinkers and they had big ideas about leaving North Korea from quite early on. But the woman that I'm talking about, I can't remember her name, but she was happy. She loved the North Korean system. She very much idolised her leaders, and when one of them passed away she was absolutely mortified. And it wasn't actually until she came out of North Korea that she realised that the rest of the world wasn't like that, and that maybe there was problems with the way things were being run. Even after the starvation, it's actually her daughter who ends up getting her out, and as I say, it's not until she leaves that she realises that things might not have been right. Even though she watches her husband die of starvation, her son dies of starvation, and she was still such a true believer. And I think it's a strange thing to comprehend for us, but I think a lot more people in North Korea than we think, it's just the normal, like they don't question it because that's just how things are. And I think it's a very interesting way to look at a different take on the world and to think how different that reality is from the reality we have. I mean, obviously to us it's horrendous, but to a lot of people in North Korea that is the way they want things to be. And even some of the people who Barbara Demick spoke to now who have left said they either regretted leaving or intended to go back as soon as things started to improve. And it also looks at the way that a lot of the time these issues are hidden from the rest of the world. So a lot of people didn't realise that there was the starvation going on. And even now it's quite possible that things still as they seem to the outside world. So it was very interesting and really eye-opening, and I definitely enjoyed it. Then I finished the audiobook, which was The Power by Naomi Alderman. This has been shortlisted for the Bailey's Prize, so when it was on the Daily Deal on Audible I snapped it up. But I'm funny with audiobooks. I really have a strange relationship with them, and I find it quite hard to concentrate to actually listening to it. It's hard for me to get a good grip on what's happening, and it's also quite a long-winded process. I've been listening to this for about 2.5 months because I only listen to it during my daily walk or during shopping or something like that, so I literally get like half an hour a day if I'm lucky. So it took quite a while, and I think that also hinders my enjoyment. Now the first thing I would say is that I still gave this 4 stars. I loved this, but I kind of wish I had read it as a physical book because I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But on the other hand, the narration on the audiobook is absolutely fantastic. Now I couldn't find out, I did try to look, but I couldn't find out who did the main audio on it, because there are a few different voices that appear throughout, but there's one woman who reads the general chunk of the book and she's fantastic. Her accents were fantastic, her timing was so on point. I just think she was absolutely the best audiobook narrator I have ever listened to. So if I do manage to find out who the woman in the main reading is, I will link her down below. So this is kind of a novel within a novel. So when we start, we're reading letters between two different people, and it's a man who has sent his manuscript to a woman to read through, and it's a historical novel. And she mentions the fact that it'll be interesting to read a novel written in a world where men had power. So straight away I was kind of intrigued. And then we get what I suppose is the manuscript, which is the main book. So this is in a world where it starts off normal and it's just like our world. Quite early on, women start to have almost electrical surges of power and they start overwhelming the men. And as they take control of this electrical surge that is developing in them, they become more and more powerful. So we follow four main people. We follow a journalist, a girl whose father is a drug dealer, a woman who started off as a nun and she started hearing voices telling her that she was sort of Mother Eve, effectively. She was the prophet who was sent to harness this power. We also follow a politician. I think that's everyone. I might have forgotten someone. But they're the main characters and we follow them in alternating chapters. And it's really fascinating. I've heard a few mixed reviews, but I think the reviews that I heard that weren't very flattering or maybe because people were expecting it to be a lot more fast-paced than it was. It's not fast-paced and it's not got a whole lot going on, but I love the concept and I really enjoyed the characters, and I think it was really interesting because it didn't favour a world run by women, but it looked at power in a general sense. So it looked at the fact that anybody in that position of power with that physical strength to literally take control will do so and will probably do a lot of damage. And there were points in here where it was like, yes, girl power, but there were also points in here where it was really taken to extremes and there was no need for it and it got uncomfortable, and the world does not turn into a lovely, wonderful place, shall we say. There is a lot of power play in it, as you can imagine, but there's also a look at the damage that power can do. In terms of the novel within a novel, I really thought that was interesting, and I actually had forgotten about the fact that that letter had appeared at the start because it did take me 2.5 months to listen to. But we come back to them at the end and obviously she gives her feedback. I think that really ties it nicely together because throughout you actually have artifacts from a museum that are from before the power or during what we're reading in the book, which I didn't actually understand at the time, which was fine. It didn't ruin my enjoyment, but that was to do with the world from which the woman is reading the manuscript, and it was tied nicely together at the end. What I would say is that it would have been a bit nicer to maybe have bits from her throughout, maybe. I don't know how that would have worked, but I feel like to make that concept work better, it would have been good to have more of it. I don't know, but yes, as a general read, I think it was really good. Then I read Pretties by Scott Westerfeld. This was my YA pick for this month, and I have to say this is the best YA pick I've had to do so far. So I read Uglies, the first one in this series, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I did enjoy it, but I wasn't overly inclined to pick up the rest of the series. But this one I really enjoyed a lot, and I'm quite looking forward to getting to the last one, which is Specials. Now, something I think even I forget is that this came out when I was about 13, 14, so it's kind of pre-YA, even though it's marketed as your standard YA trilogy now. But it is pre-YA, and I think it shows it doesn't have the YA traits. Like, obviously there's a little bit of romance in there, and obviously there are the teenage angst things, but it's got a lot more meat and substance to it than a lot of YA books nowadays, and I think that is what carried this for me. So this is set in a dystopian world in which everybody, when they get to a certain age, I think it might be 16, but I may be wrong, they are taken into Pretty Town, which is across the river from where they live when they're young, and they get cosmetic surgery basically, and everything is about being beautiful, and that is the sort of main goal in life, and anybody who wants to stay ugly is sort of frowned upon, and that's not the done thing. And I think it looks really interestingly at how we perceive beauty, especially when we're younger, and how we perceive that beauty is this otherworldly thing and an ever needed goal, when actually this discusses the fact that being beautiful isn't the be all and end all of life. It also discusses in a brief way. It discusses self-harm, and I think that was really interesting and really well done, and really quite sensitively done as well. I would definitely recommend picking up the series if it sounds like your kind of thing. Then I also finished Carson McCullers' The Member of the Wedding. I read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter about 2 years ago now, and it completely transformed the way I read. It very much introduced me to writers like John Steinbeck and sort of deep American writers who really get to the nitty-gritty of life. And yet I had yet to pick up another one of her books, but I will definitely be doing so after this. This was a 5-star for me, and it was absolutely amazing. So this is about a tomboy called Frankie who is 12, turning 13, and she's kind of starting to get into that angsty, misunderstood stage where she's not happy with anything and she hates everybody. And her brother is getting married, and she sort of becomes her first love, the idea of his marriage, and she gets the idea in her head that she's going to go away with him and his bride when they are married and become part of their family, and she keeps referring to them as the we of me, which is really, really sweet. But it's not the concept that I really enjoyed about this. I think the concept was probably the weakest thing and wasn't something that sounded like it interested me. But what I love about Carson McCullers' writing is the way she really gets to the heart of people. She has no smoke screen. She is completely just straight up. She just gets it. She just gets it. She's a phenomenal writer. The way she uses language is amazing. And this book looks at so many issues. Like, the character of Frankie is a really, really fascinating one. And she's funny at times as well. For the most part, it's quite a sad novel, but Frankie does have her moments where she is quite funny. The predominant theme is Frankie's growing up and this feeling of thinking you're an adult but completely misunderstanding a lot of things because obviously you're not. And it also looks at the desire to be older but also to stay in this safe haven of childhood. But it also looks at a lot of political issues, like there's talk of gender in here, and there's also the talk of sort of the ownership in weddings, and there's also talk of race, which I think Carson McCullers does really, really well. And it just generally is really fantastic. There is actually an introduction in this edition by Ali Smith, which I would definitely recommend you get this edition and read, but read it after the novel because it has spoilers in it. But I think my enjoyment of the novel skyrocketed from reading that essay, because not only does it look at the novel itself and the sort of underlying themes, which I would definitely be rereading this because I think there's a lot more going on in the language than you realise on a first read through, but the introduction also looks at Carson McCullers' life, and I think she is one of these authors that I'm just absolutely fascinated by, and I am now going to read everything that she ever wrote, ever, because she's just fantastic. And also it's written by Ali Smith about Carson McCullers. What more do you need in life? But yes, I really, really enjoyed this, and it's kind of, I've been having a bit of a funny reading year and it's kind of reignited my passion for reading, which is really good. So yes, let me know down below what you've been reading and I'll see you next time. Bye!